Okay, it is now time for the draft policy, ARIN 2017-2, removal of community networks. It is 9:38, so we are in the block. Very good. This is a draft policy, so I'm going to ask Alyssa Moore to come up and give the presentation. Right click is next slide.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have a pretty straightforward one, first thing in the morning here after the social, which is nice. So the problem statement, community network section of the NERPM has not been utilized since its inception in 2010. So there are special provisions for community networks in NERPM, none of which have actually been put into practice or ever used. And last year, there was a policy proposal to expand the scope and loosen the requirements around what constitutes a community network. But the Advisory Council abandoned it because there was not enough feedback. We didn't have enough information to move forward with it. So this one came up this year. So I just gave a little bit of background there, but I did want to read out the exact definition, which defines a community network in section 2.11. So any network organized and operated by a volunteer group, operating under the fiscal support of a nonprofit or university for the purpose of providing low-cost connectivity to the residents of the local service area. To be treated as a community network under ARIN policy, the applicant must certify that the community network staff is 100% volunteers. So that is quite a tight definition there. And then further down in section 6, which deals with IPv6, we have the explanation for the rationale for why this was implemented in the first place. So I think we can all agree that community networks are kind of a special case in the ISP landscape. Because they depend on volunteer labor largely and very tight budgets. So that was the explanation for the rationale for why this was instituted in the first place. All right. So the policy statement basically just move all mention of community networks in the NERPM. So this definition that I just read out would be coming out. Oh, this clicker is a pain.
There's a half-second delay.
Yeah. Again, so further down in section 6, this would come out, and then it's continued here. So this goes into the details of the qualification criteria. And I have a couple notes here. Come on. So it's important to remember that this deals only with IPv6 resources, doesn't apply to v4 at all or to ASNs. So there's no special provisions for community networks around those resources, and that if this policy were to go through and pass, organizations who were previously eligible under this policy but have never used it, they'd still be eligible for v6 resources, but they would just qualify as an ISP rather than an end user. So I have a bunch of questions up here, and I know we actually have some community nets at the meeting today, which is awesome because we'll actually get some feedback here. So most of all, I want to know, why hasn't this been used in its current incarnation? And are there networks that could qualify who fancy themselves community nets but don't fall under this definition? Is there any future harm that we can foresee from removing this section entirely? And is current policy sufficient without community networks specifically mentioned in the NERPM? So I can open it up to discussion now.
Give me a signal if you want to say something. Good morning.
I didn't even have to incite you, and you're all already lining up.
Yeah.
Normally, post a
We've
social,
been
it
anxious
takes
to
a
do
little bit
this.
of stirring to get people going. But okay, draft policy. You guys know the drill. Same as yesterday. Rear microphone, please.
Good morning. My name is Marita Mall. I'm here for Telecommunities Canada, which is a loose coalition of community networks and community networking advocates in Canada. This is the first time I've been to an ARIN meeting, and I'm here with the NA Rallo group. Thank you very much for allowing us to twin with this meeting. Obviously, we're a year late because we would have been speaking at this last year. So glad to be here because when I flipped through the things that were going to be discussed here, I saw community networks, and obviously that quickly got my eye. I sent out a note to our list, which contains a handful of community networks and other people who work in this area about what they thought about removing this particular policy piece. And the response I got, just to bring another voice into the room, was it doesn't hurt to leave it in, does it? It could be useful if community networks knew about it, which I'm sure they don't. So that's one thing. We need to. Reason why it hasn't been used, people don't know about it, and the other reason why it hasn't been used is because the definition of community networks is really pretty onerous for this day and age. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Front microphone, please.
Scott Sullivan, various Toronto technical communities. I volunteer with the Toronto Freenet, Toronto's oldest ISP and run by its members. They are a volunteer organization, but I know they have plans to include paid operators if they grow enough to be able to afford it. The 100% volunteer requirement makes that onerous and dangerous to their growth because they could lose that status. I haven't looked into this policy enough to understand the implications, but I wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Rear microphone.
Hi, I'm Shelly Robinson. So I'm Executive Director of National Capital Freenet. So it is a not-for-profit ISP, but we would also consider ourselves a community network. I definitely don't fit the definition. So I started 2 years ago, and we had 4 staff, and now we have 8 staff, and that's actually enabled to do our mission better. So when I started, we were trying to do low income services in a loosey-goosey way, and now we have an official program for all community housing tenants in our city, and that's because we have more staff capacity to serve them. So I would want to make sure that people aren't struck off the list because of this, so I think the definition bears re-looking at. That said, I do have my IPv6 space because I could afford the $1,000, and I did find out about ARIN, although relatively recently. So I would echo Marita's comment that the reason that there wasn't much discussion on the PPML about this is because folks don't know about it. And so I feel like there's an outreach piece, which I'm happy to help with in the future now that I know. But I think that there is more that can be done around this. So I wouldn't want to see this happen and then disqualify people who didn't even know it could apply to them.
But so there's been a lot of comments about how it's not used. Are you against removing this and perhaps looking? Because it sounds like a lot of these comments are about changing the policy, which is different than what's being proposed
I
here.
am against removing community networks, but I don't know the text of the one that was proposed last year, but like Marita said, I think that was probably something that I would be keen on. So I would suggest I'm against this, removing community networks entirely, and then maybe looking at them afresh through a new policy development. Does that clarify? Yep.
Thank you. Front microphone.
Hi, Celeste Denson, University of Southern California. Got 30 years experience of taking nonprofits and making them into networks, and there's always a point at which you have to hire somebody to do some functions. So I will absolutely say that the definition is too narrow to get started. I'm against removing it because we took a lot of effort to put it in, and instead I'd like to improve it so that it could actually be used for people to create them. And I think the one thing that's missing is when do you transition from being a community network to a regular one? And I think there's something there that if you start as a community network and you grow, we haven't really defined what happens and whether you get recategorized at some point.
Thank you. Yep. Yes.
Good morning. My name is
What,
John.
sir, just 1 second, please.
Just, this is Dan, Dan Alexander, ARIN AC. I just wanted to kind of interject some thinking as to why the AC is looking at this that might help some of the previous comments. One of the main reasons why this section was actually created in the first place was under older fee structures, it was intended to give a special category for these type of networks so they would fit into a different fee category and pay lower ARIN fees, make it more affordable to them. With the new fee structures that are in place, these special requirements were essentially removed because community networks have the ability to choose whether they would want to be treated as an end user organization or an ISP. So because of the fact that the fee structures were changed and the flexibility was added, the AC was considering this as kind of a redundant piece of information. We weren't thinking of removing it to exclude community networks from anything. It was just because the special categorization wasn't required regarding fees, we just thought it would be a matter of cleanup and just removing this.
Thank you, Dan. I think we have remote participation.
So Kevin from Flying Penguin Technologies would like to say that he's all for simplifying the NERPM, but he doesn't support 2017-2. And he says, just because the community network designation has not yet been utilized, it doesn't mean it will not be in the future, especially given how nascent IPv6 deployment unfortunately still is.
Thank you. Rear microphone now.
My name's John Moore. I'm from the DC chapter of the Internet Society, and I'm here for the Neurallo meeting. I've been heavily involved in community organizations, and even with on the first point, even with the fact of the fee changing, I think you don't know what the fee is going to be in the future, so I think this should be kept as some sort of guarantee for continuing recognition of community networks. The second point is that the requirement that that it be pure volunteer runs in the face of any effective community organization. To be really effective and to make the volunteers effective, you need to have a paid staff. So I really reject that point.
So
Thank you.
You oppose this policy?
I oppose removing it. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Front microphone.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. So I'm the author of both of the policies. The policy from last year to clean up the community networks and make it actually reasonable, and the author today to remove the community networks. I've dealt with a number of small community networks over the years, and I don't know one of them that would fit under the criteria of this. This is a policy that everybody said we needed but has never been used, and it actually makes it harder for community networks to get space because they look at this list and go, this is unbelievably complicated, I can't do it, when in fact they would fall under a very simple definition today, very simple criteria today. They would pay significantly lower fees than what it was 9 years ago, and they would have their space in almost an instant. So by having this, we're actually harming the community networks because we're making it unbelievably complicated when there is no complication in the current IPv6 policies. So that is why I wanted it removed.
Thank you. I will assume you're in support since you authored it. Okay. Rear microphone. That's not always the case, actually. So rear microphone.
Owen DeLong, ARIN AC, Akamai, and the author of the original community networks policy that is still on the books, and the author of the recent modifications that did get applied to it to remove HD ratio. I've worked with and been actively involved in a number of community networks with varying degrees of effectiveness that did actually fit this definition. The reason they weren't able to use the policy is that they were not able to afford the fees that existed at the time that I was involved in those community networks. I do think that there is some adjustment to the policy that needs to be done. I do think the 100% volunteer criteria should be loosened. I don't think removing the entire policy at this time is useful. I think we've got overwhelming feedback from a number of community networks that are present here today, fortunately, through largely the involvement of Noralo in this meeting, which is, I think, a very fortunate coincidence for this policy discussion.
Yes.
Because we might not have reached them otherwise. That have overwhelmingly said removing it is bad and we should look at fixing it instead. I don't think the proposal that we abandoned earlier did fix it. I think it did more harm than good, and that's just my opinion. We didn't get a lot of feedback one way or the other about it. There certainly wasn't any support expressed for it except from the author. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
Hey.
Dan, quickly.
Owen, can I ask you a question? I'm just curious, if we leave this in, it's essentially the point of these sections is to categorize them as end users versus ISPs. There's not really any necessarily special allocation aspects of the policies. So if we leave it in and they already have the choice to be categorized as one or the other, what are we trying to accomplish with the proposal? Because we were talking about we should leave it in and we should fix it, but what is the goal of the fix? I'm just curious for your opinion.
Well, in my opinion, community networks are, while they may not need special status today under the exact fee structure we have today, they certainly needed relief in the past. Fee structures are subject to change. They're not under control of policy. And so I would want this preserved as a safety net for whatever may happen in the future. And I think that, maybe there are other things that can be done to better serve community networks that should be explored. I admit I'm not currently actively involved in community networks, and the status and situation that they're in may have changed. And I think we need to get more feedback from that community on what changes are useful and necessary. I think now, as a result of the discussion here today, we're likely to get that. I encourage everybody here who's involved in a community network to join PPML and to also do outreach to the community networks that you're involved in and familiar with and talk to as part of that community, to encourage them to get more active and more involved in ARIN policy through the PPML as well. And if anybody's got any questions about how to achieve that, please feel free to approach me or any other AC member or ARIN staff member, and any of us will be able to help you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. Front microphone.
Kathy Aronson. I just wanted to echo something that Owen said. It took us an insane amount of time to pass the first community networks policy.
I think
and
3 years.
Like years.
3 or 4 years, I think.
Yeah, it was insane. And I think part of that was the lack of really participation from people from community networks. So I wanted to echo what Owen was saying about getting your help, the folks that are here that manage community networks and your communities of community networks, because if you really want to see this changed, I mean, I'm in favor of removing it and writing something that will actually serve the community. And if you could help the AC and those of us who are willing to help make it happen, that would be amazing.
Thank you. Front microphone, and microphones are still open, so please approach.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, ARIN AC. I have a quick little favor to ask of staff. Could we have a little table sign for lunch for community networks? And if there isn't one, find me the table I'm sitting at and let's have a conversation. And cool, thank you.
There you go. Staff always taking feedback in real time. Approach the microphones if you wish to speak on this topic. Kevin, are you approaching a mic or are you exiting? Okay. Wasn't sure. Okay. We will be closing the microphones in a few seconds. Going once, twice, 3 times closed, and just check with the remote participation, just because sometimes no comments. All right. Thank you very much, Alyssa, for the presentation. No poll on this issue, but as you just heard, there will be a lunch table topic. Hopefully we can get those questions, because I think there is a challenge on this one that we need to understand what are the challenges that community networks are facing so that the policy can be tailored, because obviously the current policy, given its zero usage, is having challenges. So with that, though, I will turn it back to John for the next policy. Thank you.